Love it or hate it, Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones was a movie that took risks. It really kind of decided to play with the standard Star Wars formula and gave us an almost detective film noir kind of style to it. And it definitely wasn't lacking in any kind of artistic vision or style. It had its flaws, it wasn't a perfect movie, but it also kind of threw out the jovial, lighthearted nature of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and kind of brought us to the dark side a lot. And we were left wondering, what were we going to see next with Episode 3, because there were a lot of questions. We wanted to know, how does Darth Vader become Darth Vader? Or how does Anakin Skywalker turn into Darth Vader? How does Emperor Palpatine end up looking the way he does in the original trilogy? What happens to the clone troopers? Obviously they're the pre-evolution of the Stormtrooper, and what's the Clone Wars? What were we going to see? And we had all these kind of burning questions as fans that we wanted to see. Some of these questions have been on our minds since the original trilogy, such as the breakdown of Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship. We were wondering, what would we see? What would they give us? How would this trilogy finally be brought and wrapped up? And Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, answered all those questions and more. I love talking about Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, because it's one of my favorite Star Wars movies, and it blew me away in the theaters. Every time I watch it, I find something new to like about it, and something new to kind of give me a different perspective as to why it is so good. And it's not to say it's a perfect movie, so that's again why I kind of will definitely address some of the criticisms, but I think it's the strongest entry of the prequel trilogy, and I think it really stands above even some of the original trilogy movies. And it's just, again, every time there's little details that I missed or that I didn't really pick up on previously that just make me have this newfound appreciation for the movie just every time I watch it. I've watched it at this point, it's probably the one I've watched the most besides Empire, and it's just, I'm still finding new things to enjoy about it, and I think people need to kind of give it more of a chance as well. And I mean, it seems to be the general consensus that it is the best of the trilogy, but I still think that unfortunately people look at it as having a lot of issues. They focus on more of the negative points of it. But that's where I always start is with some of the criticisms that I personally have about Revenge of the Sith, and just things that I feel like that kind of hold the movie back a bit. The first issue I have is really more of an issue that carries over from Attack of the Clones, and that's an overuse of CGI. And not just CGI where the entire image is created in a computer, which there is a lot more of here and a lot of, but also just the computer composed imagery where things are manipulated or everything just kind of feels fake, I guess. I mean, this is 2005, meaning it was done in 2004, so the technology really wasn't there to kind of give us something. Obviously they gave us the best of the time, and they really were pushing the tech that was available to them. And there are the scenes that we get are a lot of times absolutely fantastic. Obviously you couldn't do that opening battle scene without CGI, but there's other scenes that just kind of end up feeling fake, whereas they probably could have felt a little bit more organic, especially the scenes on Kashyyyk, which surprisingly aren't actually all CGI. A lot of miniatures were used, a lot of real actors were used, but it ends up the end result we get feels like it's sterile, feels like it was made in a computer. It doesn't feel like this large forest planet. I feel like it was representative of what Kashyyyk is, and I think those scenes are fantastic. It's just that I feel like it could have been more. I feel like they could have done a little bit more with giving us something that actually felt like more like a forest or something. And it's some of the scenes, like a lot of the R2-D2 scenes, for instance, come off, between him and the other droids and him just in general. It's almost all CGI. It gets a little faked at times. It just, it doesn't, it doesn't necessarily ruin the movie. It's just something that I feel, again, kind of holds it back a bit, and why it lacks some of the charm that especially the original trilogy did. I feel like this was a perfect opportunity to kind of show us a more lived-in universe with some of the warships, and you know, you're talking, this is 3 years into the Clone Wars. They could have given us something that felt more like war-torn and less pristine in terms of the way the sets come off and the way things look overall. But again, it's nothing that ruins the movie. It's just something that I feel kind of holds it back a bit. Speaking of CGI, the other issue I have, and this one is probably going to be a little bit controversial, is General Grievous. And I think General Grievous is kind of a cool character, but I have the same feelings towards him that I kind of do towards Darth Maul, although not to the same degree, because they didn't keep trying to resurrect General Grievous throughout. But it's just that he's a cool character, but he's introduced and dies in the movie, and I just feel like he was underutilized and could have been so much more. The other issue I have with General Grievous is that he feels like a Saturday morning cartoon character. He's definitely better fitted for the Clone Wars series, the cartoon TV show, and I mean, he's really interesting in the show itself and more developed, but the whole point of them having him in episode 3 was he was supposed to be kind of a analog or metaphor, or whatever you want, prologue to Darth Vader, and he's, you know, he's more a machine than whatever creature he was, and that's kind of what they're kind of foreshadowing what's going to happen to Anakin. But I just think as a character it doesn't really work. He feels like a throwaway. He doesn't really do much. If you actually watch the movie, he really doesn't do a whole lot in the movie itself, and it just feels like he could have been he feels like a character, again, better suited for a serial, a TV series, or if he had already been introduced in episode 2 and now we suddenly see what happens to him, kind of like Dooku. At least, you know, Dooku, we found out about him in episode 2, and, you know, he's killed early on in episode 3, but at least he had something to do. And again, he was at least introduced to us previously. We knew who he was. We knew his story. I mean, you really know nothing about General Grievous. And it feels, again, like a lot like Darth Maul, where he's this cool design and he's, you know, slick and kind of scary and big, the big bad guy of the movie, and he's killed off pretty, not quickly, but it just feels like it was wasted potential on his character, and it would have been cool to kind of, I mean, especially if they were going to go for the whole foreshadowing Darth Vader, I think that would have been a perfect opportunity to learn more about his backstory and what happened to him to turn him into the machine. And that, I think, is something that the movie kind of could have explored possibly. But the end result of what we get, I just feel like he was an unnecessary character to me, and just he definitely was more suited for like a Saturday morning cartoon or the Clone Wars cartoon in particular. And that brings me to my next criticism about this movie. Now, one of the biggest criticisms the prequel trilogy gets in general is that they feel like they were movies made for merchandising and for selling stuff and toys to kids. And I really never got that impression, not as a kid and not really as an adult either. That was the full intention of those movies, especially episode 1, episode 2. The issue I have is that when we get to episode 3, that's where I start to kind of see that, and it feels like there are a lot of things like General Grievous or the buzz droids, and calling them things that feel like they were put in the movie specifically to kind of sell toys or to get the name out there. I mean, if you go back to Return of the Jedi, some of the biggest selling action figures at that time were the Ewoks and Emperor Palpatine. But the thing is that they're never actually named in the movie. They never say the word Ewok in Return of the Jedi. They never say Palpatine in Return of the Jedi or in any of them. It's something that was done entirely during the merchandising phase of things, and they sold a lot of those for some of the more popular action figures. So I feel like having these things where they're constantly named and addressed are mostly done for merchandising purposes. And I mean, there's always the argument that these are kids' movies, but there's a difference between being a movie that's suitable for children or aimed at children and a movie that's a vehicle for selling merchandise. And I don't think that this ever crosses the line to that point. Otherwise, I would probably have a much different view on this movie. But it's moments like that or things like that I kind of feel push it to that level. And a lot of times it does feel like they're in the movie specifically for no reason. I mean, there was no reason for them to name buzz droids, or call them buzz droids, other than to put that name in kids' heads. And when they go shopping for toys, the accessory comes with a buzz droid or something. In a lot of ways, that made it feel like a Saturday morning cartoon in the sense that it was trying to sell merchandise to kids. And I think it's never egregious to the point where, again, I feel it crosses that line where the whole movie just becomes a vehicle for that selling point. But it's enough where sometimes it does irritate me a little bit to see that or hear it. It feels unnecessary, and I think that's where a lot of people's idea of that criticism comes from. Is there are these little moments where clearly that they were done specifically for merchandising purposes. But again, I don't think that carries over to the entire trilogy, and I don't think it's not the majority of this movie. It's not even a big part of it. It's just enough where it's one of those things that sticks in the back of my mind and just kind of irritates me a little bit. And I think it is important to kind of address that issue. Now, one common criticism about episode 3 in particular is the ending, Darth Vader screaming no. And I'll admit that really bothered me in the theater. It bothered me when I heard about it. I heard about it first. It was a big rumor talked about. And then I got the comic book before the movie came out, and I saw it that there is a moment where he screams no. But in the comic book, it actually looked really cool. There were a ton of sparks shooting everywhere. Things were exploding. Whoever did the artwork for it did a fantastic job at capturing the rage and the feel of that scene. In the theater, though, when I actually watched the movie, it was something that kind of irritated me. And I understand what they were going for. I mean, at the end of the day, this trilogy is presented like a Shakespearean tragedy, and that's kind of a very melodramatic moment for the series, and I definitely understand what the vision was, but I don't think it necessarily, it's one of those things, like I've mentioned about the dialogue throughout the trilogy, which is another problem that's definitely not as bad in episode 3, but still kind of persists a little bit, is that the way things are written, especially, again, the dialogue, is it feels like they're better suited for a stage or for reading them rather than presented on a movie screen. And it's definitely a different medium completely. You can't just translate a play to a movie and call it a day. There is some work that needs to be made because some of the lines just simply don't flow right or don't work right. And I think that's one of those scenes which definitely seemed better in their minds than it actually ended up being on screen. And I feel like they know that because it was actually toned down from the theatrical release to the home release. The theatrical release, it was a more, definitely an extended Vader screaming no. But in the home release, it's kind of cut down a little bit. I mean, it's enough to make a difference. It's not much that they cut it down by. It's still obviously there, but it's enough that it actually makes a difference to me, and it comes off as probably less annoying than it was. And I feel like I have a more of an appreciation for that scene. It's something I'm still not a fan of having in the movie, but I'm not necessarily in the camp that thinks it ruins the movie or hates it. I kind of wish they hadn't done it, but I don't necessarily want... I don't think it's that bad. I definitely have come around on that. It's something that, like I said, when I first saw it, I really, really disliked it. I was really hoping it was just a rumor. And it kind of, the other thing about that scene itself is I think that it's too quick. I mean, I think that it would have been kind of awesome to see Darth Vader go on a destructive rampage, almost in the sense of the way or almost in the way we see in Rogue One, but with his, his force powers. I mean, we do see the droids getting destroyed kind of, and the room kind of shaking a bit, but it's not as thrilling, I would say, as say like Doc Ock waking up in Spider-Man 2. I mean, that scene where he wakes up in the hospital and his new arms kind of go haywire, that scene's pretty fantastic. That's kind of what I imagine this would be like, with a bit more, explosives or sparks and destruction. And what we got was kind of underwhelming. And then on top of that, you add the no, and it feels just weak, I guess. It doesn't feel as strong, or it doesn't kind of have the same punch it could have had. And that's the other reason I don't really hate it as much, is because I understand what they were going for, and I feel like it had the potential. I just feel like what they delivered was a bit underwhelming, and that's why it kind of feels the way it does. All that aside, episode 3 is absolutely fantastic, and like I said, I find something new to like about it every single time that I watch it, or a newfound appreciation for something I may have not enjoyed as much before. And there's a lot of positives about this movie, and I feel like that's why it's seen as the best of the prequel trilogy. The biggest thing that stands out to me is the way the music is used. I mean, between the opera scene, just that kind of creepy choir that's going on, the scene where Anakin's waiting around and they're going to confront Lord Sidious, Palpatine. That the music that's used during that, the music in a lot of ways kind of foreshadows things that are going to happen, and it coincides also with the visuals itself. If you watch, there's a lot of sunsets and darker skies, and you definitely, they did a good job at kind of setting the mood between the music and the actual background visuals, but especially the music. And that ending fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin, the music that's used through that theme is just incredible, and it works so well, and it's so good to watch it. I mean, the whole Jedi Purge scene, I mean, I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place and rambling, but it's just, those are the thoughts. I mean, it's that whole Jedi Purge scene feels like its own kind of encapsulated moment, and then it just gets abruptly, that music change, that abrupt music change when Bail Organa ends up on the Jedi Temple platform, and it just kind of breaks you out of that tragedy, that somber moment of watching all the Jedi being murdered. It's just such a great use of that music to kind of jar you out of that, and I think that's something that's underappreciated. I mean, everyone knows how good John Williams is as making a score, but it's not just the score itself, it's the way it's used and the way it's put into the movie and the way it complements the scenes that it really kind of stands out to me. The other big positive thing that really stands out to me about episode 3 is one that most people actually knock, and that's Hayden Christensen's performance in this movie. I mean, again, I feel like a lot of the issues people take with him are not with him as an actor, and more just the dialogue that he's given is kind of hard to work with for any actor, but just he stepped it up. I mean, episode 2, I felt like he was kind of coming into his own again. He was a new young actor at that point, and he definitely had his moments where he shined, but I feel like episode 3 is where he really stepped it up. And I mean, right from the beginning, he feels more comfortable, he feels more natural. Right from the opening dialogue between him and Obi-Wan flying in the ships, but especially there's one moment, there's a bunch of moments, but one moment in particular in the beginning of the movie that really stands out to me as far as how good of an actor he actually is. Watch his face when during the scene where Padme says she's pregnant. Just the few seconds from his face, you can see him go from shock to anger to scared to happy, and it's something that not a lot of actors can do, just convey those expressions. And he doesn't say anything until, a few seconds later, but it's just such the way he does it with his face. He says everything with his face that you need to know. And that's the sign of a good actor, when you don't necessarily need the dialogue to know what's going on in their head or what the mood is supposed to be. I feel like it's something that people really don't give him any credit for, and I think that's unfair because there's a lot in this. I just feel like a lot of it is more the acting, or not the acting, the dialogue itself. I mean, there's the awkward moment where he's on the Jedi Council, and Palpatine says that he's going to be the representative, and he throws basically a fit over not being made a master, and it's kind of this weird scene that feels out of place because you probably would figure, but then again, he's supposed to lack that humility and in a lot of ways, and then the next scene between him and Obi-Wan is just this really deep and intense moment. Between the scenes between him and Palpatine, where he's on screen with a great actor as well, he really shines again during those scenes. There's the moment after he kills Mace Windu and he says, "What have I done?" There's just that look of shock and regret on his face when he goes to Mustafar and slaughters the rest of the separatists. Just the look, and it's really cool. Also, going back to one of my things that I liked about the visual, what they did on here is if you watch that scene, they specifically and deliberately show his eyes and that red, which was interesting because I didn't actually, I guess it's because I'd always watched like VHS copies and stuff, but I never actually picked up that the Emperor's eyes have that red yellow tint to them in Return of the Jedi. I always thought it was just Maul in Episode 1, and I figured that's just because that's who he is. I never realized that that's actually like a Sith thing, and they made it something like that for Episode 3. And it's really cool. What I'm getting at is the way they do it. They deliberately show his anger and aggression and his eyes turning that color. And then there's the moment where he's kind of just breaking down and crying, and you could see that his eyes have gone back. So you get that's part acting and also part of the makeup, visual art style, where you, without any actual dialogue, what's going on, the turmoil inside him, and you get this newfound appreciation for Anakin Skywalker, I think. And I think a lot of that though absolutely comes down to Hayden Christensen's acting. And it's something that people criticize, and I don't understand it because it is actually, it's really good, especially in Episode 3. I will defend that. That is something I will defend to my death, is that Hayden Christensen, at least at Episode 3, is at his best and doing a fantastic job. And again, it's hard to imagine any other actor doing the same job or giving the same performance, especially with the dialogue that was given, which I don't necessarily feel is bad. I just feel like it didn't translate well to the big screen. But Hayden Christensen, a lot of times, it's when he's at his best is really when there's no dialogue. That is where he shines, and that's again the sign of a good actor, is how they work without dialogue and what can they convey on screen with just their body language, with their face, with their actions. And I think he does he blows it out of the water. My absolute favorite thing about Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and probably my favorite Star Wars moment, is the end fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan. That was something that I had been wanting to see on the screen since I was a kid, since I first watched Star Wars. I mean, you see that character Darth Vader enter in the beginning of A New Hope, and you're just immediately drawn in and wondering what's his story. Why is he in this suit? What's going on? And I mean, if you know anything about if you were interested in Star Wars at all beyond just watching the movies, you knew the backstory was that he'd been horrifically burned in a fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I mean, I don't know if it's something that was talked about or I just assumed as a kid, but I figured it had something to do with being on some sort of lava planet. And they nailed that. That was something that we wanted to see, and it could have been a 2-minute long fight. It could have been something extremely short. They could have given us something kind of lackluster or a little bit boring, but that whole fight, just the intensity of Anakin versus Obi-Wan and friend versus friend and master versus apprentice, and it's just so well done. And I mean, everyone makes jokes about the I have the high ground scene, but that scene is just so tragic to watch. It's hard to watch. I mean, this was the first Star Wars movie that got a PG-13 rating, and I would say most of it has to do with that scene right there, because it was hard to watch in the theaters, and it's still hard to watch today. It's not just the physical nature of it, it's the emotional attachment as well of Anakin just shouting out he hates Obi-Wan and catching on fire, and it's really kind of grotesque in a lot of ways. And I think that's definitely the feeling they were going for. They just nailed it with that scene, and a lot of it has to do again with Hayden Christensen's acting, but just the fight in general, starting in the control room and going out and being, getting separated by the lava and wondering, oh, is Anakin going to get out of this? Is this how it happens? And then just continuing on, it feels, the fight, feels like the perfect time. It doesn't feel like it drags on too long, but it also doesn't feel like it was over too quick. It really kind of, and just the choreography of it, that's something that's fantastic throughout the entire trilogy, but especially that ending fight of episode 3. It's really just an all-out brawl, and I love it. There's punching. Anakin drop kicks Obi-Wan at one point. They're choking each other with their. You really get the feeling that this is, the hatred that's going into this fight, and just the feelings and the aggression that's going into this fight. They're really getting it out there, and it is life or death. I think that was they nailed it. That was something that we'd been wanting to see on the screen for especially myself for a long time, and they absolutely delivered everything that they needed to deliver for us. The other thing that we'd been wanting to see on the screen was the Jedi Purge. It's another, we knew the Jedi were no more in the original trilogy. If you knew a little bit more about the universe, kind of knew that Darth Vader, we knew Darth Vader hunted them down. We didn't know exactly what had happened, but we knew Darth Vader was the one who kind of sent out to hunt all the Jedi down, but we didn't know why. We didn't know what led to that point or how that happened. How did they go from the Guardians of the Galaxy to, enemy number one? And episode 3 shows us that exactly what happens, and Emperor Palpatine uses it to his advantage of them trying to arrest him, and it's a really tragic scene to watch, and it's another one that some people kind of like to make fun of, specifically Anakin killing the younglings. And it's another reason this movie got a PG-13 rating, even though you don't actually see anything. It's just that the intensity of that scene where you have children and they're obviously scared and hiding and don't know what's going on, and they see Anakin, who they know is a friend, he's a Jedi, and then he just ignites his lightsaber, and it's just, at that point things have gone off the rails, and that there's definitely no redeeming him in this movie. That's something horrific to even imply by the movie. And just watching the rest of the Jedi get slaughtered, and you're obviously hoping that they'll escape, and just you kind of feel strapped to the train tracks at this point, or strapped to the chair and just forced to kind of witness these horrific events. And I think that the movie does what it needed to do. Episode 2 was kind of dark, but episode 3 really takes it to a different place. And I think that's the other reason why I like it so much. It's not a happy movie. It's a tragedy, and it still ends on a high note. It still ends on a note of hope, which was something that always, was the difference between episode 2, which ended on the opposite. We knew it was coming. Episode 3 at least ends on a note of hope, especially because we know where the story is going. But the movie itself is just it's like watching a train wreck. It's hard to watch sometimes, just some of those scenes, and obviously it doesn't go too overboard. It didn't show any of the killings of the younglings. I think that would have been a little bit too much for the movie, but it's hard to hear criticism that it's a kid's movie, and that's what I was talking about. There's a difference between a kid's movie and a movie that's catering towards kids, and that's where I think episode 3 kind of hits that line, because there are some really dark and intense moments that probably would affect kids a lot. I mean, there's nothing gruesome. It's not about the physical or the visual of it, even though, I mean, again, watching Anakin burn is kind of hard visually to watch, but it's the emotion behind it. It's the intensity behind it. And that's where I think the episode 3 absolutely nailed it, and did such a good job with everything. The other great thing, which has been a staple of the prequel trilogy, is the action itself, and I think episode 3 really ramped it up a bit. I mean, it seems like episode 2 ramped it up from episode 1, and episode 3 just kind of it's all out action from the first scene. I mean, you go from Anakin and Obi-Wan and their Jedi starfighter flying along the capital ship, and you don't really see anything. You know, they're flying along, and then all of a sudden they do this dive, and there's the whole Coruscant is just laser blasts and explosions, and there's ships, and everyone's fighting, and it's really awesome to see that. I really kind of enjoyed it, and like I said about the CGI, there's no way they could have done that scene without CGI, so I kind of accept it, but it looks so good on screen, and it's such a fun scene to watch. And then them going through the capital ship and rescuing Palpatine. The ending fight was great. The Jedi Temple, the Yoda versus Sidious battle itself is really cool. I don't like Sidious with a lightsaber. I mean, I was okay with Yoda. I was originally super against Yoda having a lightsaber and fighting when they announced it for episode 2, but once I saw him on screen, I was totally okay with it. It was actually really, really cool to see him. And it made sense, but Palpatine with the lightsaber felt a little bit different, because I always figured him as being, as I feel most people did, more of the wizard, you know, using the Force powers and not really getting his hands dirty with a lightsaber. I mean, it makes sense that he would have one, I guess, but it feels like something he would never use in a battle. So it's a lot cooler when you watch him throwing the Senate platforms at Yoda. That scene is awesome, I thought. But the actual lightsaber fighting, it works on screen. I'm still just not a huge fan of that choice of giving him a lightsaber in the first place. But again, just they made it work just because the action is that good. The whole Kashyyyk battle is fantastic. I mean, like I said, they had, I forgot how many actors, and they just digitally copied them essentially, and that's why the scene looks the way it does, but it does look really, really good, and it was cool to see, Chewbacca's home planet, and that was kind of an expanded universe thing. Obviously, they never mention it in the original trilogy, but, it was really cool to finally see that on screen, and it was exactly as I had pictured it in my mind. So to see that representation, and I feel like there is a lot of fan service in this movie that works as well. But the action of episode 3 is just absolutely top notch. A lot of it's the choreography, a lot of it's the technical side of things, the visual effects, the CGI that they did use. And I already talked in depth about the Obi-Wan versus Anakin fight, and just the choreography of that, the swinging, the kicking, the jumping, everything just comes together, and it just feels so, you really get that energy from it, and it's just something that I think really they at least they did a good job with the action of this movie. It's never boring. I would say there's no part that really slogs down or gets boring. Like there's a couple moments here and there, but they're brief. It's not like episode 2, which has some scenes that kind of really feel like it grinds the movie to a halt. But here, it's action. It's mostly action all the time, and I really think that's why the movie stands as strong as it does. So those are the reasons I think that episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, is just an absolutely fantastic Star Wars movie, and a great movie in general. I feel like everyone really stepped up their game. Everyone took the criticisms of the trilogy to heart and improved on things in a lot of ways. And I mean, it's not a flawless movie, but it's obviously the best I think it could have been, and I think that people don't give it enough credit for the way it wrapped everything up and the way it kind of brought us to the original trilogy and kind of bridges that gap. So I think that's something that people should really give another chance. I mean, all these movies I do, but Revenge of the Sith is definitely the best of the bunch, and it is really one of my favorites. They just, everything came together with it, and it's such a fitting conclusion. I mean, they needed to nail it, and they absolutely did. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you like episode 3? What did you feel about it? Was it an improvement over the rest of the movies? What do you think of my criticisms as well as my comments on what the movie does great? I want to hear from you, so leave a comment down below. If you like this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Also, make sure you are following me on social media, on Twitter at Metalloud, on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Metalloud, and if you want to support me on Patreon, it is patreon.com/Metalloud.